Hey guys, welcome back to Dane Harden Martial Arts on YouTube. I had a request from one of our subscribers to do a deep dive into this concept of self-defense. What he really requested was not so much defending against various moves, there's lots of that on YouTube, but he really was more interested in this idea of what are some of the principles of self-defense or defensive tactics that perhaps I learned in my career with the military and with teaching martial arts. So in this series, we're going to try to do a little bit of a deep dive into what I think are really the 7 core principles of self-defense. So in this section, we're going to define the idea of self-defense. And in order to do that, I've written it down as this definition, and I got it from several different reviews from various definitions at law schools. This one I like is from the Cornell School of Law, pretty good law school. Cornell says that self-defense is the use of force to protect oneself from an attempted injury by another. If justified, and that's a big if, comma, self-defense is the defense to a number of crimes and or torts involving force, including murder, assault, and battery. Now that word, tort, I've written that out as well. Tort defines a wrong committed by someone who is legally obligated to provide a certain amount of carefulness in their behavior to another, and that causes injury to that other person. That other person may then seek compensation in a civil court for damages. So tort sort of relates to responsibility and liability as opposed to self-defense, which defines that you're trying to protect yourself from harm. Okay guys, so this is section 1. In section 1, we're talking about fitness and readiness. I heard a joke, some martial arts instructors were talking and they said, their idea of fitness was fitness jumbo pizza into their belly. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about overall physical fitness. In the military, we have this thing called a combat clock. That combat clock should be set for 60 seconds. That means that you are physically fit enough to sustain a 110% effort in a fight game for at least 1 minute. You can go beyond a minute, terrific. Sometimes that fight will last that long, but most fights are 10 to 15 seconds and you're done. Now, the important thing is you start getting into 1, 2, 3, 4 minutes, you start getting into that mental aspect of the fight game, because anything beyond a minute and you're going to be suffering mentally and physically. That kind of brings to mind the Jun Rhee school that I went to years ago in the late 60s. The Taekwondo motto, there was a sentence in it that said to build ourselves physically and mentally based on the Taekwondo spirit, physically and mentally. Master Rhee, 50 years ago, recognized that there was both this mental aspect of fitness and your overall health aspect of fitness. Those two things need to balance so that you have personal readiness. In 1976, I went into basic training and I had a drill sergeant. The gentleman's name was Drill Sergeant Gamachi. I don't know if I'd call him a gentleman, but Drill Sergeant Gamachi taught us the rule of P. The rule of P is proper prior planning prevents piss poor performance. What he meant by that was you got to do your homework. You got to get in a dojo, you got to train. You got to work your self-defense skills, work your punching, work your kicking, work your groundwork, work your escape. If you're into handguns and all those sorts of things, make sure you understand how to prevent sports and stoppages and how to reload, how to combat shoot. All those sorts of things are aspects of the rule of P, of proper prior planning. I always used to also teach my students the 4 C's of self-defense, which were clear, contact, counter, control. Clear, contact, counter, control. Clear means clear the line. Just simply don't be there. Clear the area, clear the line of attack. If you are attacked, clear the line of attack and contact with your lead weapon. If you can counter and then go to a control, that's all 4 C's kind of rolled into one. It's interesting that if we talk about the old Karate Kid movie, in that movie there was a self-defense principle that was taught that we call Enzan no Metsuke. Metsuke meant vision or mountain vision. So Old Sensei talks about this quite often, but in that Karate Kid movie, Miyagi looks at Daniel-san and he says, Daniel-san, always look eye. I like that. You should. You should look eye, but don't stare. Don't make eye lock. When you make eye lock, you get drawn in and you lose your peripheral vision. Ends-on is this mountain vision where you're trying to take everything in. I like to teach my students, look eye and glance away. When you scan back through, you're looking at their hands. What do they got in their hands? They have a weapon, or they got fists, are their hands open, are they carrying a knife, a club, a gun? When you scan through, what kind of clothing are they wearing? Is the clothing loose that they can conceal some sort of a weapon? I even take it so far as to what's on their feet. Are they wearing flip-flops, tennis shoes versus combat boots? Flip-flops, they won't run very well. Tennis shoes, they'll be able to run, but they're not so heavy. Combat boots, the running will be reduced because they're a little bit heavy, but the combat boot is heavy, so it functions as a weapon. All of those are things that when you're scanning an area and thinking about something from a self-defense setting as simple as always look eye, yeah, but I'd take it further than that. Always look eye, look hands, look clothing, look shoes, look environment, look around, okay? Make sure that you've got that down. We can't go through all of this in this day and age without having at least a discussion of an active shooter scenario. The active shooter scenario is run, hide, fight. Teachers, you need to make sure that you've taught your students and you need to rehearse this. Where do they run to? What's their safe point? What's a safety zone? Is there a rally point or a rendezvous point? Do you have primary and secondary entry and exit points? If you want, do you have a tertiary exit point? Which windows actually open and function? Is there something that you can throw through a window if it's been painted shut? Is there some pre-designated tree that you want all your students to go to so you have accountability? So that's run. You can't do that and you've got to hide. Explain to your students the difference between cover and concealment. If they're hiding behind a plywood desk that's maybe a 1/4 inch plywood and the guy shoots at that, that's concealment, but it's not cover. They're still going to get hit, they're going to get injured, they could get hurt. Maybe there's a coat room in your classroom where you hang coats. Maybe you could harden that with metal or some sort of thickened plywood, put a steel door on it. Now you have both concealment if the students go in there and lock the door, but also cover in that if the person's shooting at the door and it's hardened, it has metal lining in it that might stop a 22 round or some sort of a smaller caliber round, right? So those are some things to think about. Once we talk about running and hiding, we have to talk about fight. So when we talk about run, hide, and fight, that fight is the last thing. Is there a way to barricade your door? That's a method of fighting. Maybe you want to think about having the school get some sort of metal detector. Maybe you want to hire an armed guard so that you harden the school. As a hardened target, the likelihood of your being attacked is much less. Or you have to make a decision. Do you want a concealed carry and personal carry? And are you willing to use that weapon in order to defend yourself and your students? So that's kind of this deep dive into the idea of personal fitness. Make sure, guys, if you're a martial arts instructor, that you just don't tell the students to do stuff. Make sure that you can do it as well. I know, I'm pushing 70. I'm not as young as I once was, but I can still throw the kicks and the punches and I can still keep up with my students and do everything that I ask them to do. That's fitness, that's readiness, and that's also leadership. The next section on self-defense is coming. So guys, principle number 1 was fitness. Doing a realistic assessment of our overall physical fitness level, our mental fitness level, and applying lessons learned from what are the areas that we are weak in and how can we improve our overall readiness. So now we're on to principle number 2. I call principle number 2 situational awareness. When we talk about situational awareness, it is a concept that, a lot of times we say we have a 360-degree range of motion, situational awareness. What's going on in front of me, to the left of me, to the right of me, and behind me. Our head's on a swivel, as we say in the military. I like to change that. I like to call it a 720-degree awareness area. Not just forward, back, left, right, but also up and down. When I look up, are there spotters? Are there observers up there? Are there mirrors? And maybe there's a sniper perched up on high. Is there a camera that could be recording what's going on? Is there a motion sensor that if I walk to it, a light comes on? When I look down at the ground, is it sandy? I can kick sand in the face of the attacker. Are there big rocks around, like a BFR? In the military, we call that a big freaking rock, actually use a different F word, but a big rock that you could use to defend yourself, a stick, something in the environment that will help you to protect yourself. Is the environment itself something that's dangerous for you? Are you on a paved parking lot? Are there cars parked there that you could use to create obstacles between you and your aggressor? So 720-degree range of motion for the battlefield that you're operational in when we talk about situational awareness is really important. The next little acronym that I think is a good take-home lesson for martial arts instructors is this abbreviation OCOCA. OCOCA is something I learned at the Command and General Staff College and probably also in the Officer Advanced course way back when. And I've applied that throughout my military career. When we are going into an area, that abbreviation, OCOCA, I look for areas that I can be observed from. The C, I look for cover and concealment. The next O, I look for obstacles in the area that I'm operational in. The K, I look for key terrain features that could be used to my advantage or to my disadvantage. And the last, the A, is avenues of approach. How might I be attacked? How might I escape? So when we're using that OCOCA, that's a really important concept. You know, there's always people get into this discussion, well, what's the difference between cover and concealment? Well, cover, if someone's drawing a weapon and I run behind a large pickup truck, that pickup truck's made out of metal. That metal may be enough to stop those rounds from penetrating all the way through the truck and actually hitting me. Versus concealment, if I run over and hide behind a bush and a guy has a pistol and he's firing at me, that bush is not going to stop those rounds from traveling through. So that's the difference between cover and concealment. Avenues of approach, you know, when we're talking about like going somewhere for just a trip. I went to Miami recently to an art festival. I looked at the map. I determined my ways in and out. I preset my GPS on my phone so that I would have a walking route to get back to my car. I put a pin drop where my car was parked. I made sure that I took up a traveling overwatch position behind my wife every 4 or 5 steps. I scanned the area. I look for reflective surfaces like mirrors or glass windows, mirrors on a car, circular mirrors that may be up so that I can better track things that are going on around me. I don't want to sound paranoid to you, but I do these things almost all the time because it's something that I've been trained to do and it's part of my habit. So that's this idea of creating better awareness, situational awareness. That's principle number 2 of what I feel is really important in this concept of self-defense. All right, guys, so we're slowly stacking these up. So self-defense as far as principles. Principle 3 is very simple. I've written it out. Move. It brings to mind for me a time when I was fighting at the Battle of Atlanta. This was back in the early 1980s. And I was sparring with this guy who had just a very unorthodox style. It was something that I wasn't used to. He was jerking and kind of quivering. And I recall looking at this, and in my head, I'm watching the television in my head, something Joe Louis told me to never do. But I was doing it. I was watching the TV in my head and trying to figure out, what on earth do I do in order to counter that kind of movement? And that's when one of my students screamed, move, as loudly as he could. And I started moving. And within that movement, I began to slow my heart rate down. I began to improve my readiness level. I began to change angles. And I just started blending with the attack. So movement is tantamount to what we in the military would call maneuver. So when we talk about maneuver, we're talking about trying to put the opponent or your attacker in a disadvantaged position over the position that you're in. Maybe it's you're trying to get uphill of that person. Maybe you're trying to maneuver in such a way that the sun would be in their eyes. Maybe you're maneuvering them to a point where you know there was gravel or dirt or sand or debris in the ground, and you can kick it in their face to create what is basically a space cushion or a timing blade. They bring their hands up and they're blinking while you run and escape. So all of those things are part and parcel of this idea of maneuver. If you're in a parking lot, on principle number 2, we talked about understanding the situation, situational awareness, what you're in. And we introduced that concept of the abbreviation of a OCOCA. If you're in a parking lot and there are lots of parked cars around, and all of a sudden 3 guys are standing this way, facing me, and I'm this one guy. And I start running away from these 3 guys. If I run between parked cars, a lot of times what will happen is these guys will stack up in this type of a column fashion so that now they're chasing me this way. So it looks like this as opposed to this. 3-on-1 versus 1-on-1. So I can now sidekick that guy in the lead, or punching or flipping or throwing or do whatever it takes to drop him in position. And now he creates an obstacle, which creates a timing delay, which in a self-defense setting, time and distance are absolute keys to your survivability. And timing and distance are related to maneuver on a battlefield, putting yourself in a position that gives you an advantage. Another part of maneuver is this idea of shaping. If I kick to the groin, I know immediately that the person's head is probably going to move forward. Knowing that in advance is a really important maneuver principle called a seesaw effect, where I kick low, punch high. Or maybe I punch high, kick low to a knee, because I'm shifting their body position, what is called shaping. Maybe they shoot a jab and I do an offset with my rear leg, which slips me slightly to the left, and as the punch goes by, I'm coming under and connecting an uppercut into their ribs. All of those types of maneuver principles have to be trained. That gets us all the way back to principle 1, your fitness level, your readiness level. If you are riding on your laurels based upon your rank or your belt, and you're not actually physically training hard to maintain that fitness and conditioning, even in a gentleman my age, I'm leaning on my 70s here coming up. So it's not a spring chicken anymore, but I still train, and you still need to try to understand how you put all of those first 3 things together, this idea of fitness, situational awareness, and maneuver and movement all work hand in hand in order to credibly increase your survivability in a self-defense setting. So guys, we're on section 4. Section 4 is this idea of momentum. We've covered section 1, which was what's your personal readiness, what's your fitness, right? We covered section 2, situational awareness. Section 3 was really, we just talked about movement or maneuver. And now we're up to section 4. Section 4 is this concept of momentum. In a self-defense setting, momentum is really everything. There's a great book by Lieutenant Colonel Grossman that's on violence, on killing, on war. He's written several different books. In his book, he talks about the scenario of the sheep, the sheepdogs, and the wolves. When the wolves are attacking, it is the sheepdogs who change the momentum. They attack the wolves when the wolves didn't expect it. That's what you want to be able to do in a self-defense setting, is to switch the tide of that battle and turn the momentum in your favor. Attack that person if you have to. Momentum is something that goes way back. There are some great anecdotes about this. If we look at some Civil War generals, there was a Confederate general named Nathan Bedford Forrest. He used to have a saying, he was a cavalry officer, that when you get the enemy on their heels, you want to keep up the spear. What he meant by that was to keep them moving backwards, to press your advantage as far as you can in order to destroy the enemy in place. Momentum coming against you, if I use Ulysses S. Grant as an example, they used to say that he had what was called 3 o'clock in the morning courage. His soldiers could wake him up from a dead sleep and say, "Sir, we're surrounded on 3 sides and the enemy's getting ready to completely surround us. What do we do?" And Grant would get up, calmly think through the process, and establish a battle plan and try to regain momentum so that he could garner favor in that battle and survive. So when we talk about this idea of momentum in battle, it's really trying to turn the tide or the energy of that fight in your favor. Most of the time, wolves don't expect the sheep to attack back or to fight back. That's where you need to think of yourself not so much as sheep, but as sheepdogs. You have teeth, you're strong, you're powerful. You're not going to just lay here and take it. You're going to fight back. Gain the momentum, gain the advantage on that attacker, and defend yourself. Okay, so this is section 5. In section 5 on self-defense concepts, We've covered the first 4 sections. Section 1 is your personal preparedness and fitness. Section 2 is situational awareness. Section 3 was this idea of movement or maneuver. Section 4, we talked a little bit about the concept of momentum in battle or in a self-defense setting. And in Section 5, we're going to talk about triggers. I'm not talking about a trigger on a pistol. I'm talking about preset triggers. This is kind of a little bit more of a technical issue with self-defense in that we need to have preset triggers. What is it that somebody has to do that's going to trigger me to attack them? That's going to trigger me to kick into a self-defense mode. If somebody pulls a knife, I'm not going to wait for them to start slashing. If I start to see the knife come out, the time to attack is immediately at that moment, as soon as they pull the knife. Same thing with a pistol. If we're talking a closed 10 by 10 room, that knife is far more deadly than a pistol is going to be. That knife doesn't have to be reloaded. That knife doesn't ever jam. That knife can cut and slash and you bleed. You watch your life fluids drain from your body. So it's a psychological weapon. The pistol, if he pulls it and shoots and gets a lucky shot, takes me out in the head, I'm already dead. So I'm not really worried about a self-defense setting at that point. But if I can close that gap, if I see that trigger, which is he's starting to go for a weapon, he's going for something, that's a clear line in the sand that I can't let him cross. Those rules of engagement and escalations of force are things that you need to work out ahead of time. You need to do your homework before you're in the self-defense setting. Having your homework already worked out in your head is a really important principle in self-defense, and knowing what the trigger is going to be, wherein you launch the attack, you become the wolf, you attack that predator before he's able to predate upon you, your wife, your son, your family, your loved ones. You're going to stop that assault. You're going to have trained, have that physical fitness, have that readiness, launch your assault, have good maneuver, develop that momentum, and you will become the sheepdog rather than the sheep to be predated upon by those wolves. Okay, so in this tour de force of self-defense concepts, the next concept is section 6, which is this idea of commitment. How committed are you when you're being attacked? Are you reviewing these things in your mind ahead of time? Making a decision about it ahead of time means you're doing your homework before you actually get the test. And that's what you want to do. You want to have those answers readily available. Are you willing to shove your thumb into someone's eye socket? Are you willing to choke somebody out? Are you willing to use elbow strikes, knee strikes? Are you willing to break bones and joints? Are you willing to draw your gun and actually shoot someone? I've seen many soldiers on deployments where that single commitment of drawing and shooting was a very tough decision for them to make. But you have to make it before you're in that self-defense setting. So the idea of commitment, we talk about rules of escalation, rules of engagement, but there's also rules of de-escalation. If you hit someone and they back off and they quit immediately, then don't press that advantage any further. And I know we talked about momentum before, but momentum is this idea of having a persistent pursuer where you want to shift that and try to get the momentum back in your favor, as opposed to you don't want to become the guy who then presses the attack to the point that now you're going to be legally liable for pressing the attack too far. So this idea of commitment is, what are you willing to do? What are you not willing to do? And make sure you know what those things are well in advance of any self-defense setting. Okay, so we're on to the last section in what I've kind of divided into these 7 principles of self-defense. The first principle of self-defense was the concept of fitness and readiness. The second principle of self-defense was having good situational awareness and understanding what that is. The third principle of self-defense was this idea of movement or maneuver, maneuvering in a battle space, trying to put yourself in a position of advantage against your attacker so that you can defend better. Number 4 of this section was this idea of momentum. If someone's attacking you, turn the tables on them, become the sheepdog, bite back, fight back, hit them, train to the point where you reverse the momentum of battle, and now all of a sudden they realize, oh hell, maybe I've screwed with the wrong person here, right? Number 5 is this idea of a trigger. Know what your line in the sand is. Know what it's going to be if they cross it, that you need to defend yourself. Worry about court and worry about lawyers and all that other stuff later. Understand what's that line, and I'm going to defend myself, and at least I'll be alive sitting in court to defend myself. Number 6 was this idea of commitment. How committed are you to this idea of a fight, of fighting for your life in a self-defense setting? I often will ask my students, how many of you guys have ever been in a fight for your life? And I see very few students who raise their hands. And then I ask them, how many of you have ever been in a fight, maybe in a playground as a kid? And then, of course, a lot of people raise their hands. Yeah, I did that. I said, well, what if that bully shoved you and you smacked your head on a curb and that killed you? Would you then not have been in a fight for your life and you didn't even realize it? And invariably, I usually get some, oh, okay, well, I didn't really think about it like that. That's this idea of commitment. If you're going to fight, you need to fight like you're the last monkey. There's 3 monkeys. You're that 3rd monkey, and you're trying to get up the ramp onto the ark. You're trying to throw that second monkey off of that ramp so that you can get on board the ark and survive. So then we now have this final number 7, criticism. Personal criticism. Be critical of what your skills are, okay? I have pretty good boxing skills. I'm an Aikido guy. I have pretty good joint locking skills. I was a Taekwondo guy, so I've got good kicks and pretty good elbow strikes and percussion skills. I've done some military combative, so I have some skill sets on the ground. Of those 4 skill sets, probably my groundwork would be the weakest. So if I'm looking at giving myself a grade, I'd probably be a C on groundwork, maybe an A on Taekwondo and stand-up skills, maybe a B on joint locks and Aikido. What about weapons? Do I have familiarity with knives and how they're used? Well, I don't know. I've had a little bit of that, but maybe that's a D in my assessment. How about handguns? Do I worry more about marksmanship and hitting the target, or do I worry about shooting off of the front sight or practical weapons retention or combat shooting? Maybe I get a C or a B in that area. But be critical of yourself. Guys, if you've got 100 pounds of belly fat hanging over your black belt, be critical of that. For God's sakes, if you're in a self-defense setting and you can't last 10 seconds because of your personal fitness, take it back to level 1 and improve your readiness. It's really important. So guys, that's my take home. These are my personal views on what are 7 really important components of self-defense that you guys can use as principles and you can use for teaching. Thanks so much. Please like and subscribe. I'm Dane Harden with Dane Harden Martial Arts on YouTube.